humanitarian team.
Hi, Asel. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good day, and good evening, depending on where you're watching us from.
So today we're talking about the topic of where do I belong and the topic of belonging that comes up a lot, whether we are transitioning or whether we are staying in the humanitarian sector, right? And that's the topic that we want to talk about, how you could think about it, how you could navigate this topic in case that's something that comes up. So before we start, we wanted to give some maybe ideas of how it feels for you to belong, and the way that I can share from my experience. The way that I feel belonging is when it feels very familiar, where it feels like it's very accepting, that we share a lot of common things together, that we know each other a lot more and deeper. We have this sense of connection, right? So these are, I think, the elements that make me feel like I belong to a place or to a group or to wherever I want to. So that's how belonging looks like. And Vicky, maybe we can start the question
Mhm.
of like, how are we currently thinking in terms of belonging? What situations arise where we ask this question to ourselves, right?
Yeah,
And how we can navigate it. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much. And the question of belonging, a question of where do I belong, are really crucial because we all it's a natural feeling and a natural attendance we have to want to belong to some sort of a community. And in our case, it's a humanitarian community where we somehow, by definition or by choice, we really chose to belong. And very often, as we are when we're talking about transitioning, the question pops up as, do I still want to belong to this community, and if so, in what form? Or so that will be one of the key questions that I think people, or colleagues that are deciding to transition, might be faced with, as to, do I still want to be part of the community? Do I want to completely leave and really create additional identity or additional sort of belonging, or create a different community? Do I want to belong to a different community? So the question of really, where do I want to belong and what community do I want to be part of, becomes an important question.
Yes. And when that happens, is I really would like for you to think about, um, instead of thinking whether I can belong or whether they will accept me or whether it's really good for me or whatever the like this cautious, vigilant feelings that should come up when we think about where to belong, instead of like focusing so much on that, maybe the focus could be on how do I want to belong wherever I decide to go and belong, right? So we may choose consciously at some point that these are the groups or these are the communities that I want to belong to. And you have your reasons why that's what you want to do, and therefore get more clear for yourself, how do you want to belong? Because I think a lot of us, like from workforce, have been used to this, like thinking that, oh my God, I hope I will be accepted. I hope I will be somehow part of this group. And if I don't, then we have a lot of struggle around it, right? So we have a lot of
Yes.
suffering around how we're not belonging or how we're not being seen
Yeah.
or valued the way who we are. And therefore, somehow many of us have adopted this belief that as long as I belong in whatever form, or as long as I'm adapted, adjusted, and just like not rock the boat, so to say,
Mhm.
then it's fine. And I used to do this big portion of my career as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then realizing that that has a lot of like toll on our emotional well-being, where we keep trying to like fit in and forgetting who we are and what we stand for, maybe, or maybe we want to say things in the way that's different than others, right? So in those moments, in order not to jeopardize our belonging, we tend to then keep low, or we tend to hide maybe, and that's something that we no longer maybe want to do this. And therefore, the question comes when we are creating new communities or going for new communities, then how do we want to belong? and how do we want to also feel in that environment, right? Maybe those are the focus and the questions that you want to ask yourself. And how do you decide for yourself, this is when I belong, and this is also when I actually don't want to belong because they don't represent what I stand for or who I am, right? So that
Yeah.
might be another way to think about it.
Yeah, that's very important what you're saying, and I'm hoping that also in the spirit of inclusion and more inclusion in the organizations, that there is less and less feeling of being excluded or not being well, what you mentioned, not being taken seriously or not being really considered as a part of the group. So I'm hoping that there will be less and less, but I know that we are definitely not there. And your questions are really important because when we are thinking about where do I want to be, how do I want to belong, we are really creating an idea for our future, because we know that we become we are influenced by the individuals around. We influence, but we are also so really go into, and again also entering, but also freely leaving if you see that it's not serving you. This is going to also create your future. If you're going, and here I'm just an example, if you're going to spend a lot of time in the amongst humanitarians, of course you will, that's very clear. But if you consciously, and some of the colleagues that I know that transitioned really outside of humanitarian sector, that you are going to spend time with maybe artists, right? You have artistic
Yeah.
skills, and you're going to be entering the community of artists. Your life will look very different from what it used to be. So I think that's also something to be aware of. If you're going to become something, or join a club of fishermen, I don't know, and you're gonna spend time fishing, so your life will be again very, very, very different, and you'll be meeting very different people. And I think this is very important to also realize and mention, because as humanitarians, we are often very, very sort of secluded, I would say almost secluded communities. When we are on assignments, when we have restrictions, very often we are really amongst humanitarians all the time. And I hear it very often that we actually do not even know how is the world around, and we feel that we are really in our little cocoon. So that those things are really important to also start developing different identity. I'm humanitarian, and what else? So maybe that's what
Yes.
I wanted to
I
mention.
love that. Exactly. And the other thing that I think that comes up in our belonging conversation with ourselves is this objection of, oh, others wouldn't understand me, or they will not be relating to my story, or like this feeling of only humanitarians will understand. And I think in some ways that might be true, right? Because of the nature of work that's very specific. But at the same time, I'm a real believer in giving a chance to other communities also experience how we experience the world, and also like share with them and talk to them about it. I used to have this feeling that they're just not interested in me, or they're not interested in my experience because it's so drastically different than everyone else's, right? And then I realized that that's just my way of
Mhm.
constraining myself and
Yeah.
like a bit isolating myself and not really wanting to maybe even connect in some cases, right? And maybe at times it felt good to do that, to process a lot of things. But at the same
Mhm.
time, I realized that we as human beings have um, always abilities to connect to other human beings, no matter what they do and how they live their lives. And it's fascinating how much we can build connections, like without them being humanitarian or without them really maybe understanding
Yeah.
rightly so also what we went through. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't create new connections with them and feeling belonging in different ways, right? And that's
Yeah.
also what I really felt like when I was going back to my country. I had this feeling, oh my God, now I will not have anyone, or I have left the country for so long. Now everything have changed and all of this stuff, right? But now I'm like seeing more communities around me here that has nothing to do with humanitarian, but I
Yeah,
have a lot of other things in common with them anyway. Or we
yeah,
can talk about a lot of other things anyway. And I still have this sense of belonging from
yeah,
those conversations, right? So therefore, I think it's important that we don't restrain ourselves or constrain ourselves unnecessarily. And if you're doing that, ask yourself why you're doing it. And is that really serving you as well? Because that may just get you more isolating yourself instead of belonging.
yeah, yeah. That's very important. We really need to cultivate those connections outside of the humanitarian sector, which I see very often, and I've definitely been there myself. That we tend to sort of cut them, not even cut them, but just not nourish them, because it's a
Yeah,
relationship, it's a connection, and every connection needs to be nourished. If
yeah,
we do not nourish this sort of connection, it is going to become weaker and weaker. So it's important to to nourish these connections outside, to really those things you love doing outside, and maybe to those communities you want to belong maybe in the future, or you have been belonging in the past and you want to continue being part of the community. So sometimes there is a little bit of effort, and as you are saying, it really develops a different part of us. So when we belong, when we relate on a different level than humanitarians, when we relate because we are learning a language, or because we are on the level of sports or philosophy club
yeah,
or whatever that is, or maybe political affiliation outside of the humanitarian sector. So we really are developing another part of ourselves and building a community and contributing to a community. And
yeah,
as a community, we give and we receive. So it's really very important that this part of yourself is nourished somehow, so you don't feel so separate from the
yes,
rest of the world. You don't feel that, okay, I'm only humanitarian, that's the only thing I know, and
yeah,
and I cannot leave the sector because I'm only humanitarian, I don't know anything else. So that's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that we keep on
yes.
telling ourselves sometimes.
Exactly. And the other thing I think that comes up in this context is the opposite effect, which is that we no longer want to hang out with humanitarians
Yes.
because we want to just get away from them and like, and I think I experienced this phase as well a bit. And then I realized the main reason why I was experiencing it because I have I haven't really processed a lot of the disappointments and hurt
Yes.
feelings and feelings of a lot of criticism that I kept
Mhm.
like compiling in within myself, and because of those feelings that I really didn't have the space to be discussing things that I felt like I knew too well, and then as soon as I went and discussed this with other humanitarians, then I was so ready to criticize all black and white, and then in the end
Yes.
not really like feeling like, oh, I just don't want to be part of that, right? And I think that's for especially for humanitarians who are leaving the sector or taking a break from the sector, this is something that you may experience it. It's maybe a very natural way of your body's reaction to all the feelings that have been stored so far, right, that you haven't really looked at, and therefore it may be also very natural that you no longer want to talk to others who have similar experience. And in that case, I would suggest that it's highly recommended that you take time to uncover all of those feelings out into the space and to like journaling, whichever the way that you process your feelings. And then having a look at all of them and not necessarily saying, oh, this humanitarians that I don't want to hang out with, because it's not like the
Yeah.
problem is not them and you know it deep down. But I think because we go through this, we believe that if I'm going to talk to them, I will get worse, which is not the case. So therefore, as soon as you process a lot of those, then you are able to then go back and connect or stay in friendships and communities, whichever the way, with people that you have built relationships with.
Yeah, yeah, that's very important. I really like what you're saying, and I think that happens to many people. I definitely remember also time when I was really feeling very upset and very agitated at certain, and there was a time when I really needed a break from all of that. So again, I think what we are also trying to say, it you might feel that way, and maybe a healthy break from anything humanitarian could be good for you in order to process, in order to meet different people, in order to join different communities, to really think completely outside. I think it's very refreshing actually to leave the sector, or to take a break from the sector, to really discuss and look at the world in a very, very different way. My experience is also, and I think many people feel this way, that as humanitarians we get really we start thinking all in the same way. We start really having very, very similar mindsets, and looking at the way from the same perspective. But once we venture outside and look at it from a different perspective, and from perspective of different groups, that it changes. Just it can change so much about our world perspective, about worldview, about where we want to go in life. And so I think these kinds of healthy breaks, whether you really want to completely leave the sector or just want to give yourself a sabbatical, after several years. I personally have also done that point when I felt that I was really, really stuck and I just couldn't go anywhere. I took a 1 year sabbatical. I was, of course, lucky enough to be granted this sabbatical, and I went to study. So really something related, but still in a very different context. So it was extremely helpful to sit in a room with very different students that come from a very different mindset, and just to look at the problems in a way that I've never ever considered. So that would be a suggestion
Yeah,
too.
excellent. So, in summary, I guess the way that belonging is used to be presented in the past and how we're seeing belonging now, I think it's getting a lot more like choice based, right? Instead of you have to be part of it. Like when I was growing up in my village, it was not an option, right? You wouldn't just say, oh, I'm just going to be, I don't know, having another community. It was just part of it. You grew up there. This was it. And then as I grew, and then I learned that there are lots of other options. And I think the same goes with belonging, is that I think we're getting more conscious in terms of how and where we belong to, why do we want to belong to those groups, right? And how do we want to connect with them in the way that feels really authentic to us, or really real or truthful to us. And I think we can always find those groups or places, no matter whether we're staying in the humanitarian sector or leaving it. So I think exploring what suits you best now without letting your work to be too much dominant, maybe that's the part that you can go for it and see for yourself that you actually can decide where to belong and how to belong it. And that's really the recommendation that we make. And then within those groups, then you also decide how far do you stay, how much do you stay, or how much of this you want to influence you in your identity, right? How much maybe you don't want to. So all of these are beautiful ways to explore, I think, ourselves, and that would be, yeah, my recommendation. What would you say, Viki,
Yeah,
to
thank you.
wrap up?
So, just to reinforce what you're saying, really choose your community carefully, but also at the same time, it's not a sentence for life. You may choose a community, join, and then realize that maybe that's not for you after some time. So it is not a sentence for life. You can really leave as well. So that's maybe the two things I would like to mention here.
Yes. So if you're having any questions around belonging, or you feel like you don't really belong, you maybe feel like you will not belong if you leave the sector, or you will lose a lot of your identity, or anything around basically transitioning that makes you like worry and fearful, then absolutely come coach with us, ask your questions. We're ready to help. And we really want everyone who's like humanitarian identifying themselves feeling that belonging no matter where they are, no matter what city or place with whom they are. And what if we're able to create that sense, right? And also doing it on purpose instead of just feeling like I have to now that I'm here kind of thing. And the more we do this intentionally on purpose, I think the more we will likely to feel it and nourish it and grow it. And that's really what we would like to wish for you. So have a beautiful week, everyone. Thank you, Viki.
Thank you, Asel. Thank you, everyone. Wish you a wonderful rest of the week.
Yes,
See you
and
next
we'll
week.
see each other next week.